We're getting close to the end of this chapter. So in part 6 here, we're going to start off by talking about functions of proteins. And again, we've already alluded to some of these. Proteins are going to be crucial to growth and repair or replacing tissue throughout the body. Okay, and so again, we said that a large percentage of our dry mass is proteins. And so proteins are going to be found throughout our body in every single cell. And again, very important role in growth, repairing, replacing tissues. If we don't consume enough carbohydrates and lipids in our diet, then we will use proteins as a source of energy. So they will be broken down into individual amino acids, and those amino acids will be used for energy. When proteins are used for energy, they're unavailable for other functions like growth and repair. And so that's not a really good thing. But again, our body will turn to proteins when we are low on carbohydrates and fats. Okay. Proteins, again, they produce vital body structures. Proteins provide structural support in body cells and tissues. There are key structural proteins found throughout our body. They include collagen, actin, and myosin. These three proteins make up more than a third of all of our body proteins, so there's a lot of them in our bodies. And these will provide a matrix for both for muscle, connective tissue, and bone. Okay, so again, they're found throughout our body. Growth, again, proteins are involved in growth, producing new structural support. And then again, throughout life, right, proteins are going to be required to replace damaged or dying cells. When individuals are in a state of malnutrition or disease, your body proteins will be broken down for energy. Okay, and so we'll talk about protein wasting and the development of diseases, and we're going to actually talk about this particular disease a little bit later in the chapter. Okay, so what else? So again, growth, repair, structural support, and energy if need be. Okay, here's another role of proteins in the body. They're involved in maintaining proper fluid balance. The proteins albumin and globulin, these are going to be two proteins that are found in the blood circulating, and they're going to be responsible for helping to maintain fluid balance between the blood and the surrounding space around blood vessels, so in tissues. When protein consumption is inadequate, the concentration of these proteins, albumin and globulin, in the blood decreases. And because of that, so what these proteins do is they draw fluid out of the body tissues. They attract fluid into the bloodstream, into capillaries. Okay. When these proteins are not there in adequate supply, what will happen is that fluid does not get taken up into blood vessels. Instead, excessive fluid builds up in the tissues surrounding those blood vessels. Okay, so we end up with swelling, which is called edema. Okay, and that's not a good thing. So here we go. So again, if we're looking at body tissues, right? So within body tissues, we have things called capillary beds. Okay, and the capillary beds lead to other larger blood vessels. Okay, so they're part of our circulatory system. And so what will happen is, so normally, what would happen is shown here at the top. What will happen is, so this vessel right here would be an arteriole that ends in this capillary bed. Okay, so arterioles come from arteries. Arteries branch off of the heart. And what will happen as the heart pumps, it's going to push blood through arteries, push blood through arterioles, push blood into capillary beds. And once that blood is in capillary beds, fluid will be forced into the interstitial space, so into the tissue by blood pressure generated again by that heart's pumping action. So fluid will leave the capillary beds and enter into the tissue, okay? And this interstitial space, that's the space between cells, okay? So our cells are kind of bathed in a fluid called interstitial fluid, and that fluid comes from our cardiovascular system. It's pumped in our blood vessels, and again, exits our capillaries at tissues. And this is really important to making sure that our tissues, our cells of our tissues, get all of the nutrients that they need. So along with that fluid is oxygen and glucose, okay? And then what happens over here, kind of at the other side of the capillary bed, is that there will be these proteins, again, albumin and globulin, that are circulating in the bloodstream, and they're going to actually draw excess fluid into the bloodstream, okay? And again, it's those proteins that are responsible for drawing the fluid into the capillary bed. This is going to happen as blood pressure declines, and then this fluid, along with our blood cells and waste products that brings with them, will go into venules, which end up dumping into veins. And again, the cycle kind of continues. Okay, so under normal conditions, when this happens, we get our tissue looks normal. So blood pressure is balanced by counteracting force of the protein. So the fluid that comes out, there's an equal amount of fluid that goes back in because we have proper levels of protein circulating in our bloodstream. When we have inadequate levels of protein circulating in our bloodstream, what happens is this: we end up with edema, swelling. Okay, so again, blood pressure exceeds this counteracting force of the protein. So blood pressure is pushing fluid out of the capillary beds into the tissue, and the proteins that are supposed to kind of, suck back in, help that fluid end up back in the blood vessels, there's not enough proteins, and so that process is stalled, and so the fluid remains in the tissue, and we end up with swelling, which again is called edema. Okay, and here's just some pictures. Look, this is really bad. Very bad edema on this foot. You can see this foot right here has edema, and you can see this depression that is left from kind of pushing. Okay, and the same thing here. This is a child's feet, so same thing. So not enough protein ends up in this loss of fluid balance, and we end up with swelling or edema in our tissues. Okay. Okay, so what else besides fluid balance? Proteins also play a really important role in regulating acid-base balance and keeping pH constant. So proteins act as buffers. Okay, what else? Proteins can form hormones, enzymes, and neurotransmitters. They also contribute to immune function. So we mentioned this earlier through the production of antibodies. Antibodies are proteins, okay, that have a really important role in the immune system. Proteins are involved in transport. So this could be membrane proteins involved in transporting things across a plasma membrane, so into or out of a cell. Or they can be transport proteins like hemoglobin found in blood, which is going to carry oxygen. Okay, so they're either transporting substance from one part of the body to another, or they're transporting stuff kind of across the cell. Again, if energy, if glucose supplies run low, protein will be converted into glucose, which again is called gluconeogenesis. This is kind of a backup plan. This is not, it's not a great use of protein, but again, if glucose levels fall low in the blood, protein, your body will be triggered to convert protein into glucose so that there's an energy source. Okay, so again, that's a backup plan. Okay, so there's a run through of functions, and I could spend, a whole chapter talking about proteins as hormones or proteins as enzymes. And so just introducing it to you here, if we had, unlimited time, we would dive deeper into it. If you take general biology with me, we cover a lot of this in grave detail. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time in this chapter to dive into those really deep. Okay. Okay, health concerns related to protein intake. Okay, so this is protein energy malnutrition. So these are individuals that are not getting sufficient amounts of protein. Okay, we've got two different health concerns that can arise here. So we've got kwashiorkor and marasmus. Okay, both are a little bit difficult to pronounce. So here on the left, we have a child who again has kwashiorkor. This is a severe protein deficiency, often accompanied by infections and other diseases. So here are the characteristics. So edema, especially in the abdominal region, mild to moderate weight loss, maintenance of some muscle and some subcutaneous fat. Remember, this is going to be the fat just underneath the skin. And there are growth impairments. So individuals that have this condition are going to reach 60 to 80% of their normal weight for their age. So they're going to be below weight. This has rapid onset, and individuals often also suffer from fatty liver. Okay, so again, protein deficiency. In marasmus, this is, again, a protein deficiency, but these individuals also have a severe energy deficiency. So again, severe weight loss, wasting of muscle and body fat. So individuals who have this condition have that skin and bones appearance. Again, severe growth impairment. Individuals here weigh less than 60% of their normal weight for their age, and this develops more gradually. So it has a more gradual onset. Again, both are the result of not getting adequate levels of protein. They're both forms of malnutrition, undernutrition. Okay. Another health condition related to protein intake, we need to mention high protein diets. Okay. So again, we've talked about this. The upper limit, right? The AMDR for protein is 10 to 35% of our daily calories. And so protein intake should not exceed the high mark of 35% of energy intake. It's, you know, this is dependent upon age and activity level and total calories, right, matters. So again, you don't want to exceed 35%. You know, for some individuals, 35% of your calorie intake, that would be a lot of grams of protein. It would be hard to go over that. But we are, you know, the high protein diets push high levels of protein intake. And so, yeah, you have to make sure that you stay underneath that higher end. Having too much protein doesn't have any health benefits. Consuming over the amount of protein that you need in a day is not going to, help you build larger muscles or things like that. There is a limit to how much protein is going to be beneficial. And having too much protein may increase health and disease risk. We talked about, constipation, dehydration. If these proteins are coming from saturated, from foods that are high in saturated fat, so, meat, full fat dairy, there could also be a risk of cardiovascular disease and things like that. Okay. And remember, excessive amounts of protein over what your body needs, that protein turns to glucose and fat and gets stored. And so it could also lead to obesity and all, type 2 diabetes, all of the same risks there. Okay. Again, we can spend all day talking about other, issues related to improper protein intake, but we're just going to mention a few. Okay, so underconsumption, way underconsumption, and overconsumption. We're on to the last part of the chapter. We're going to talk here about vegetarian diets. And again, we've mentioned some of this as we moved along. Vegetarianism is the restricting of the diet to foods of vegetable origin. And there's all different types of vegetarians. Okay, so let's look at this list. Individuals who are semi-vegetarian, which is also called flexitarian or plant-based, they're going to eat vegetables, grains, nuts, fruits, legumes, eggs, dairy products, and occasionally seafood and or poultry. Okay, so what does it limit? It limits or excludes red meats, and individuals following this type of diet may also exclude other meats. Okay. Then there is pesco-vegetarian, similar to a semi-vegetarian, but excludes poultry. So individuals here would have fruits, vegetables, nuts, eggs, dairy, and seafood, but no poultry. Okay. So again, pesco means fish. Fish would be the only non-plant source of protein in this diet. Okay. Lacto-ovo-vegan, or sorry, lacto-ovo-vegetarian. So vegetables, grains, nuts, fruits, legumes, dairy products, that would be the lacto, and eggs, that would be the ovo. Okay, so no animal flesh, no seafood. Lacto-vegetarian, similar to lacto-ovo-vegetarian, but these individuals do not have eggs. Okay. Ovo-vegetarian, vegetables, grains, nuts, fruits, legumes, and eggs. No dairy, no meat, and no seafood. Vegan, also called strict vegetarian, very, very strict. So these individuals are only going to have plant-based foods. So vegetables, grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, and legumes. No meat of any kind. No dairy, no fish, no eggs. Okay. Of note, people who follow a strict vegan or strict vegetarian diet, they may not get adequate amounts of vitamin B12, zinc, iron, or calcium. Okay, and so these vitamins and minerals, you require, meat or eggs or dairy to get these. And so, not that there's no levels of, like, for example, calcium or iron or zinc, in some vegetables, but not adequate amounts. Okay. There's not going to be any vitamin B12 unless it's a fortified food. Okay. And so, so people who are vegan need to eat fortified foods or take some type of a supplementation to get adequate amounts of vitamin B12, zinc, iron, and calcium. Okay. Next one is macrobiotic diet. This is a vegan type diet. It becomes progressively more strict until almost all foods are eliminated. At the extreme, only brown rice and small amounts of water or herbal tea are consumed. That is not a good diet to follow at all. This would be an extreme diet. It can cause malnutrition and even death. Okay. Fruitarian is the last. These individuals only eat raw or dried fruit, seeds, nuts, honey, and vegetable oil. Again, extremely restrictive, deficient in protein, calcium, zinc, iron, vitamin B12, riboflavin, and other nutrients. Very dangerous. Okay. So the more restrictive you become, the more you are going to lack either certain macronutrients or micronutrients. Okay. So why do people choose vegetarianism at some level, whether it's vegan, lacto-vegetarian, lacto-ovo, pesco, whatever level it's at? Well, some of these have health benefits, decreasing the risk of chronic diseases, especially those that are, low in saturated fats. Okay, so eliminating, meat and dairy, can have health benefits. Ecological reasons, religious reasons, ethical reasons. Some people don't feel like it's that they can eat an animal. And then lastly, concerns over food safety. So there's many different reasons why people choose vegetarianism. And on this slide, I'll leave you with this. Raising animals for meat is not an efficient way of obtaining protein because it requires the use of about 40% of the world's grain production to raise meat-producing animals. It also takes a lot of water, a lot of space. The carbon footprint from raising meat-producing animals is pretty high. So again, people make this choice for a bunch of different reasons. This would be an ecological reason. Okay, so again, here I talked about some of these already. Here's the benefits of vegetarianism. Again, reduce the risk of obesity. For people who follow, I hate to use the word healthy vegan diet, but if you're living on French fries and chips, that's not healthy, right? But if you're living on fruits and vegetables, whole grains, right? So kind of a healthy vegan diet. You're going to see a reduced risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, some different forms of cancer that are linked to some of these, kidney disease, kidney stones, gallstones. Okay. Individuals tend to have fewer digestive problems, and the American Cancer Society and the American Heart Association, both of these encourage plant-based diets to promote health and reduce the risk of chronic disease. Okay. Some of these organizations also promote, if you're not going to go fully vegan, doing meatless Mondays, or, having a few days during the week where your diet is plant-based. The more plants you eat, the better off you are. Fruits and vegetables. Okay, there are, downfalls to vegetarianism, being a vegetarian. And we talked about some of these already. So vegetarian diets can be low in some vitamins. And so I gave you this list again down here. So vitamin B12, what does it do? It assists with DNA synthesis, protection and growth of nerve fibers. Really important nutrient. If you're not going to eat meat or dairy foods, which would have vitamin B12, how do you get it? You're going to have to eat fortified cereals, yeast, soy products, meat analogs, meat substitutes, or take a vitamin B12 supplement. Okay, but it's a really important vitamin. You can't live without it. Vitamin D, really important. This promotes bone growth. Again, found in not found in a totally vegan diet. So how are you going to get it? Fortified foods, margarine, soy products, adequate exposure to sunlight, at least 15 minutes a day, which is hard to get in the Northeast. And then again, supplementation may be necessary. So you may have to take a supplement. Riboflavin, which is also known as vitamin B2, promotes the release of energy, supports normal vision and skin health. Whole and enriched grains, leafy vegetables, mushrooms, beans, nuts, and seeds. So again, individuals who are going to follow a vegan diet need to make sure that they're eating, nutrient-dense food. Okay. Iron assists with oxygen transport. Iron is part of, it combines with the hemoglobin protein to carry oxygen in your blood. It's also involved in making amino acids and hormones. Where are we going to get it from? Whole grain products, prune juice, dried fruit, beans, nuts. So there are options here. Calcium maintains bone health, assists with muscle contraction, blood pressure, nerve transmission. Again, you're going to have to choose fortified foods. Okay, almonds, dry beans, leafy vegetables. Zinc assists with DNA and RNA synthesis. This should say important in immune function. The bottom of my table is cut off. You're going to find this in whole grain products, wheat, germ, beans, nuts, and seeds, or again, from a supplement. Okay. The other problem with being a vegetarian is making sure that you get all 9 essential amino acids. And so individuals choosing some type of a vegetarian lifestyle really have to think about meal planning so that they get complementary proteins to ensure they're getting adequate amounts of all 9 essential amino acids, as well as adequate amounts of protein and adequate amounts of other nutrients like vitamins and minerals. Okay, so there's definitely nutrient concerns that come with trying to follow a vegetarian diet. Okay, lots of benefits, but also concerns. That is the end of chapter 7. So we are done talking about proteins.